Well, it's a pleasure to meet you two. What's your name? Oh, yes, you're John Negroni and Will Ashton of the Cinemaholics podcast. Is that right?
Oh, you bet, big business.
Honored to be here in the presence of the CEO, CFO, COO, and HR manager of BestFlix, the biggest streaming service on the planet.
Right. Well, I suppose that's why I'm confused. You two are here pitching a song idea to me. You see, on BestFlix, we produce original shows and movies that follow a safe, vanilla format that is designed to be on our top 10 for 2 weeks, then never watched again by anyone. And hey, don't you two review movies on a podcast?
We sure do, big business, but the thing is, John and I want to start spreading our wings and find success in other media, especially because our movie review podcast is, well, a failure.
That's right, Will. You see, movie reviews can only get you so far in the podcast game. It's not like Will Ashton and I are going to start solving 20-year-old true crimes anytime soon.
We learn from our mistakes.
But you know who doesn't watch movies at all?
Academy Awards voters?
Well, besides them, no. Gen Z, the TikTok kids, as we like to call them.
But you see, big business, Will and I, we might just have the song that will appeal to the younger generation.
Wait a minute, is that a tape deck from 1996?
Get ready to hear your next #1 single on Best Flicks Music. We call it Death Cab for Spy Kids.
Is there such a thing as a good murder?
She was my wife, John. How could you?
I should have killed you when I had the chance.
You're not the father.
Mamma mia, here we go again.
Guess that's a cabin trip we'll never forget.
You didn't build that.
Well, I don't think I understand.
It's Death Cab, but for spy kids.
But it's so serious and political?
Exactly. Kids love politics and taking things seriously. And Obama.
Just look at Teen Vogue.
So we figured, why not make a spy song dedicated to their tastes?
You don't need to put it on any major spy movie you have coming up. Maybe just No Time to Die or something.
I don't know, boys. This doesn't seem like the type of catchy song that will make the kids sing and dance in the streets to cheap choreography they stream for an app that is better than Vine only on paper.
Paper? See, big business, you are old. But John and me, we're millennials. We get confused for Gen Z all the time.
And vice versa. Trust us, big business. If you release this song, the only thing you'll have to ask yourself in 2 months is, oh, is that the song from Pixar's Up? That's where I recognized it.
Well, I guess we could just put it on CBS All Access.
No, we want to shoot something higher than that. Put it on Crackle.
Welcome once again to Cinemaholics. I'm Jon Negroni. I am the box office columnist for Atom Tickets, head writer for Cinemaholics.com, and I'm an occasional writer of books. He is a pop culture writer for Cinema Blend, soon to be award-winning songwriter. And oh, of course, he reviews films for Cinemaholics.com. It's Will Ashton.
Hello.
You can find more episodes of Cinemaholics, including our full archive, all 174 episodes of the main show, and many more. Well, we've got so many episodes of this show. A lot of bonus episodes. It's incredible stuff. You can find everything we've done on Cinemaholics.com. Very easy to find. And you can write into the show anytime by sending us an email. Cinemaholicspodcast@gmail.com is how you do that. And if you'd like to support this podcast, you can become one of our monthly patrons on patreon.com/cinemaholics. We have 3 big reviews this week. And we're going to kind of give equal strength to all of them, to the point where it's like we have 3 feature reviews. It can be really fun because you and I have seen all 3 movies.
Yeah.
And they're pretty big movies. They're ones that are warranting tons of conversation. Not really, only one of them is, but we're still going to talk about all 3. And before that, we do have some off topics to get to. Extra Milestone just put out a new episode. They talked about Breathless, Eyes Without a Face, and Deep Red. Will, I hope you get a chance to listen to this episode soon. 3 really great discussions. Sam Nolan, host of Extra Milestone, he had on Jason Reed from the Anyway That's All I Got show they used to do a couple years back. And they had a very interesting discussion about the French New Wave and Dario Argento's film, of course, and Eyes Without a Face, which was such a creepy, wonderful movie. And that is in the podcast stream right now.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen Eyes Without a Face, but I have seen Breathless. Obviously, that's great. I've seen it, I think, at least a few times. And Deep Red I actually just saw for the first time in October because I saw a live score of it from Goblin. So that sounds like a lot of fun. Yeah.
Huh. Very cool. Very cool. I hope you get a chance to see Eyes Without a Face at some point, because it really is like genuinely one of the scariest movies I've ever seen.
It's good. Yeah.
Real quick, both of us caught a couple of extra things this past week, some things that came out earlier in the week. So not quite as new, but still pretty new. Will, you saw the new comedy special for Eric Andre, correct?
Yeah. One of the few times I actually watched a comedy special. Yeah, I saw his new Netflix special, Legalize Everything, which is based on the stage show that he did. I saw that in November as well. So, I mean, for me, a lot of the bits were fairly familiar just because it was more or less the same show. They just added some more crowd work to make it a little different. But otherwise, it was more or less what I saw in November. And it was a good time. I mean, I don't know. I think it worked better live just because I think his energy is a little bit better in person. It's a little bit more spontaneous and a little bit more true to his style, I think. And I don't know. In the special here, I thought it was fine. Like, I mean, it's just kind of hard to compare it. Like, so many people are going to be seeing this for the first time, and I'm just seeing it as like, here's him doing this bit in another city. So I guess my experience is a little bit different in that regard. But it was a good time. I enjoyed it. It's really short, too. It's like only like 53 minutes or something. So it's pretty short for a Netflix special.
Awesome. Yeah, I saw it on the Netflix recommendations, and I did consider looking into it, but I ended up watching a couple other things instead. I actually watched 2 new Netflix documentaries that just came out, and I really recommend both of them. So the first one is Disclosure: Trans Lives on Screen. This is a new documentary directed and produced by Sam Feder. And it's really great because it's, you remember Black Horror, the Shudder documentary, Black Noir, the documentary about like horror noir. Thank you. Yeah. Clearly I don't remember it. But yeah, Horror Noir, which is like a documentary about the history of the way African Americans have been portrayed in film. And Disclosure is kind of that same idea, totally different, style of documentary, of course, but it's that same sort of look at film history through the lens of how transgender people have been portrayed in pop culture for many years. So not just films, but also TV shows and just the wider pop culture gambit. And this came out at Sundance, and I didn't have a chance to see it, but I heard really good things. One of the main talking heads is Laverne Cox, but you also recognize a lot of other transgender activists and actors. So I really recommend watching this because you get such a great glimpse into how connected transgender life has been with film since the very beginning, since the first films came out. And it definitely makes you rethink a lot of the movies you've seen, a lot of the cliches and tropes we see when it comes to cross-dressing, when it comes to how transgender people react when they see themselves on screen, both the good and the bad, and kind of the middle of the road. And it was really fascinating stuff, very educational, because I think some people might watch this like who are transgender, and they might be like, yeah, I kind of knew a lot of this stuff. Mm-hmm. But for a lot of people who are not as caught up with what it's like for trans people to see their lives on screen, this is a really good refresher for cisgendered people. So I definitely recommend it to them. It might feel a little bit of like, I don't want to say basic, but maybe a little simplistic for some people who are way more caught up on this. And they might be like, yeah, I knew a lot of this. Still kind of, you might really like some of the people discussing this and like sharing their stories about growing up, knowing that they were, clearly going through something where they wanted to transition, and the confusion that can come along with that when you watch TV shows that sometimes are just really awful about the way they portray transgender people. So you see a lot of people like, I should say like Lily Wachowski is in this. And there was some really interesting discussion with how she was like, dealing with the way the Matrix films have been received over the years and how that kind of conflicts with some of the things that she was thinking of maybe subconsciously when she was making that film with her sister. So yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in here. There's a lot of movies they talk about that I will never look at the same way again. Specifically, Boys Don't Cry, which I really thought I had a handle on that movie, but hearing people who are transgender talk about that movie is a totally different story. And so I really hope people check it out. This is on Netflix right now. I highly recommend it. I'd definitely give it like a very solid B, very high B. And then I also saw Athlete A. Have you heard about this one?
A little bit. I remember did this one also premiere at Sundance?
I don't think so. I don't remember hearing about it. I think I heard about it maybe at Tribeca.
Okay.
That it was going to be at Tribeca, but it didn't come out because it was canceled, obviously. Mm-hmm. So I think Netflix just sort of like pushed this out this past week. But yeah, this is a new documentary from Bonnie Cohen and John Shank. It is about the USA gymnastics scandal, where Larry Nassar, the just truly despicable gymnastics doctor, was brought to justice for assaulting hundreds of young female gymnasts. Harrowing stuff. And what I liked about this documentary, I was kind of reticent going into it because I was like, man, this is going to be really depressing. You are sort of getting into this deep dive into a story that is really distressing, that it happened, and it happened to these young women who clearly like were absolutely abused and were violated. And we spend a lot of this documentary sort of like looking into how this guy was able to get away with it. And you see a lot of him through like documentary footage and everything like that. And it's awful. It's awful to see. But what I liked about the documentary is that it did touch on sort of how this could have happened and like the culture of gymnastics and some of the problems that system needs to address when it comes to like really deep questions about like why gymnasts are sort of viewed as like childlike and sort of the advantages and disadvantages of that. And also like the system of how the Olympics works and how it could have propped up a corrupt abuse of these kids. And like how, even though like people were coming forward and saying all of this stuff about Larry Nassar and some of the coaches as well, their concerns were never addressed because USA Gymnastics had sort of this like entrenched systematic silencing of any sort of dissent. And the authorities were not alerted to this when they needed to be. And so it's a deep, thorough documentary, really gets to the heart of things. I think some people might criticize it a little bit for meandering here and there and some of that commentary, but I appreciated it because I think that commentary helps sort of contextualize how this stuff happens. And I think that that's pretty informative. And I think that, assuming that this is a very even-handed documentary in the sense that, of course, it's not on the side of Larry Nassar, which I think it would be absolutely atrocious if it was. Nor is it trying to sort of be like, well, here's his side of the story. No, I mean, it's pretty clear cut, like what happened here. I do appreciate that the journalism in this story is passionate and it's unrelenting, but it's also like, it's very credible, comes across as very credible. So I actually recommend this one quite a bit as well. And so more of a low B. I don't think it's as unique as Disclosure. I think Disclosure has a little bit more of a format and style that is more enticing, and that I think more people will glean some information from that is maybe newer, more refreshing and interesting. This one is definitely really important if you don't know a lot about the story. I certainly didn't know all the details, but yeah, if you already have a pretty good grasp on what happened here, this might sort of not be a very useful documentary, but I do think there are some things here and there that you'll get something out of just by watching. So Athlete A, it's also on Netflix, low B. And it's funny, because I think these are the highest grades I'm going to give on Cinemaholics this week.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Little teaser. Sure. We'll see though. But all right, those are some of the extra things we watched this week. We do have to do a quick birthday shout out before we jump into the reviews. So we have a birthday shout out from Brittany, who just turned 27 this past Saturday. She sent us a message, which is very interesting, a very interesting topic to bring up. So here's what she said. Hey, John, Will, and all you other crazy Cinemaholics. For my birthday shout out, I would like to know, what is a genre of movie or TV show you wish we would get more of? Love the show. And as a side note, I'm really anxious to find out how Mr. Millennial and his friends are doing. I am assuming the worst due to their silence. Brittany from Maine.
Well, should we bring
very interesting.
friends?
Well, I don't know where they are. Say
well, let's see. I mean, let me see if I can find Mr. Millennial. Give me a minute. Hey, Mr. Millennial.
Really
Are you here? Hey, what's up? It's me, Mr. Millennial.
Mr. Millennial, we haven't heard from you in so long. Are you okay?
Yeah, well, I've just been chilling. Not a lot to do here in quarantine.
Are you wearing your mask, Mr. Millennial?
Oh, I wear it all the time, even when I'm not in public.
Good job, Mr. Millennial. We appreciate
thank you. It's a little hard to breathe right now because I'm wearing it right now, so I'm gonna step back for a bit.
Yeah, go away.
Okay.
Will, where are you?
Hey, I'm back. What's up?
Will, I missed you. I don't know, that Mr. Millennial guy creeps me out.
Oh, really? He gives me a little bit of a hard time as well.
Well, it's just us again, which means we can talk frankly. So, all right. So the question Brittany asked was, I would like to know what's a genre of movie or TV show you wish we would get more of. What do you think, Will? What would you like to get more of genre wise?
I mean, one genre I've really grown to like a lot the past few years that I feel like hasn't really been prevalent a lot nowadays is Giallo. I never pronounce it right. Giallo, yeah. Obviously, like some of my favorite horror movies. We just talked about Deep Red, Suspiria. I mean, pretty much any movie from Dario Argento and a lot of other Italian filmmakers and non-Italian filmmakers.
And we should probably say, like, some people listening might not know what Giallo films are. So if you don't know, Giallo refers to like mystery fiction films, usually like horror. It's kind of like a callback to like those paperback novels that used to be really big in Italy. And they're called Giallo because Giallo means yellow, and they had like yellow covers and stuff. And so, yeah, like you said, Deep Red, Suspiria. There's also films like Dress to Kill and What Have You Done to Solange? I think probably a big one is probably like A Lizard and A Woman's Skin. There's a lot of really good ones to seek out if you want to start getting into Giallo films if you haven't already.
Yeah, I mean, apparently, I haven't heard this confirmed, but I heard that James Wan's new movie is supposed to be like secretly a Giallo film, but I haven't heard that confirmed. So if that's the case, I'll be the first big one we've gotten from an American studio, and who knows how long. But yeah, it's a fairly dated trend now. We haven't really seen as many films like that. If they do that, it's kind of more of like a genre throwback. So I'd like to see someone do that in a way it's like, not solely playing nostalgia. Like you said, I think the new Suspiria it was obviously based on a Giallo film, so it had Giallo influences, but it was obviously going for a different thing stylistically. But yeah, I would really like to see that again.
Didn't Dario Argento make a film called Giallo like over a decade ago?
Yeah, wasn't Adrian Brody in that?
Yeah. I didn't see it, but it is pretty on the nose.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so Giallo films, I would love to see like a modern Giallo film, kind of something, that calls back to it, but isn't, slaving to nostalgia. That would be really interesting. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I couldn't think of anything in the last few years that's come out that would probably fit that bill. But hey, maybe somebody listening might actually know of a small one that we haven't heard of.
Right. I mean, the only one I've seen recently was Knife Plus Heart that came out a couple years ago. But that was also a fairly nostalgic film as well. So yeah, I would like to see someone tackle in a way that's, reverent to its elders, but also like trying to do its own thing. And that movie does to an extent, but yeah, I mean, one that's not as nostalgic as the other ones that we've seen of late.
I don't want to be a broken record on this question because I think I've said like 2 weeks out of this month that I love swashbuckling films. I wish we had more of them. So I'll say something a little different. You all know that I want more films like Zorro and Princess Bride and that kind of style. But another film genre that I really wish we got more of, and I think this one we might be getting some new ones soon, is medieval horror. Like any sort of horror that takes place in a realistic medieval setting. We do get some things that are like we get horror that's in the past. Like we get things like The Witch and The Lighthouse. I'm just saying Robert Eggers films.
Sure.
But yeah, like films that like Army of Darkness is probably a good example, but maybe something a little bit more serious than that. Maybe something that's kind of like one of the things I really liked about The Nun is even though that's not in a medieval time period, you spend a lot of time in this like really old medieval castle. And that's a horror film that's just like, I find that aesthetic very interesting and we don't get a lot of it. Kind of reminded me, it's one of the things I wanted to like more about something like Crimson Peak, for example. And I know some people are looking forward to Robert Eggers' next film, which is called The Northman, which will possibly have some of those elements. And I know like The Green Knight is a medieval film that I don't know how much horror is in it. I think it's going to have some like horror elements, but yeah, that's definitely a film I'm really anticipating because it might be fitting that bill as well.
Yeah, I mean that's another genre that I haven't really seen a lot of recently, let alone at all. Like I said, I think
it's tough.
It's like the biggest one I've seen.
It's tough to make a horror film with that big of a budget, because usually horror films, they make them on the cheap by design. But if you're doing something medieval, you start spending a lot of money. So I could see why a lot of people might look at that and, be like, well, that's not really worth it for us to make. Although one film I forgot about is actually Apostle with Dan Stevens, who we'll be talking about later in this film. Apostle kind of gets into this a little bit.
I like that one.
That's not a movie I loved, but I definitely enjoyed it for those like old school horror elements in that sort of time period.
Did you mention one? I haven't heard of this, so I was just looking it up. The Headhunter?
Headhunter. No, I don't think I've heard of that one.
I don't know. I guess it came out last year. It's apparently a medieval horror film that came out fairly recently.
I would love to look into it. It's just one of those things where if they are making those films, they're not making them with like the bigger budgets. Like I would think of what was that movie? The not Overkill, or it was a couple years ago. It was like World War II kind of like zombie horror.
Oh yeah. What was it? Overnight?
Oh
yeah.
No, it was like, man, I'm blanking on the name of it. I really liked that movie too. But yeah, that was the one where
Overlord.
With Overlord. Thank you. Yeah, with Kurt Russell's son. And yeah, that movie, like that kind of movie, but in like medieval times would be really cool.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. I wasn't crazy about the film, but I definitely like the idea behind it, and I would like to see more films like it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. All right, so let's get into our main reviews for the week, starting with Irresistible.
The Democrats are getting their asses kicked. We need some way to road test a more rural-friendly message.
If you can't live your principles in the bad times, I guess they aren't principles, they're just hobbies.
Nice.
John Wayne and a tractor have a baby, and all you can say is nice.
Really nice.
Oh my God, it's so nice.
Colonel Jack Hastings is our key back into the great now swing state of Wisconsin. He just doesn't know it yet. Can I be completely honest with you? No bull.
Be nice. My daughter's here.
That was your daughter with her arm up the cow? Guys like me don't know how to talk to guys like you. Do you have a bottle opener?
It's just a twist.
Twist off?
Yeah, I know.
Maybe he does need a bottle.
Maybe use your vest.
All right, Irresistible is a new political comedy. It was written and directed by Jon Stewart, his first film since he made, was it Rosewater?
Yeah, that was his directorial debut.
Yeah. So he retired from The Daily Show in 2015, stepped down from that. Trevor Noah took his place. And since then, he's been kind of doing like little things here and there, like clearly not been making a lot of films or anything like that. But we see him pop up, on like late night television every once in a while. And this movie seems like something that it's kind of interesting because it refers to the 2018 midterms as something that hasn't happened yet. So it sort of felt like to me, this was a movie he wanted to make several years ago, but it's only just now like finished, which I thought was strange because it picks up in 2016 and we meet Steve Carell's character, who is this Democratic strategist who worked for Hillary Clinton. And of course, he has his wounds licked because Hillary Clinton, of course, lost the presidential election in 2016. And the movie sort of picks up not too long after that. So that takes place in, it seems like 2017 / maybe early 2018. And this Steve Carell guy, he's like this DC insider who's trying to, drum up support for Democrats again. He's trying to appeal to the heartland because those Rust Belt swing states are what tipped Donald Trump's favor in winning the election. And so he goes to a small town in Wisconsin after one of his staffers shows him a video of this guy who might be like the next face of the Democratic Party. And he decides he wants to help that guy, played by Chris Cooper, and his daughter, played by Mackenzie Davis, try to win this really small campaign in this struggling small town in order to help improve the image of the Democrats nationwide. So that's kind of the deal of the movie. We also have Rose Byrne come in as this sort of like Kellyanne Conway Fox News strategist who sort of just like comes in and like lies about everything, has no remorse for it, but she has like this sort of like weird energy with Steve Carell. I think they were sort of playing the George Conway, Kellyanne Conway tension a little bit there. And then we also have a couple of recognizable faces in like Topher Grace and Natasha Lyonne, who work for Steve Carell's like political apparatus. And that's really the deal with this movie. It's sort of just this, it's kind of like swing vote, you know, where it's sort of like both sides of the political aisle have their problems. And really like, if people could just sort of get along, a lot of our problems would be solved. And I think that's a reason why a lot of people are coming out against this movie and saying they really dislike it. And they're saying this is the wrong movie for 2020. I think that's what a lot of people are saying. Like if this had come out a couple of years ago, I think maybe people would have been more receptive to this. But because we're in the middle of like one of the most contentious political times of our time, I've seen a lot of people say that this feels a little old fashioned, a little dated. But I don't know. Will Ashton, what do you think of Irresistible? Did you succeed in resisting it?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a film where it's like expectations versus reality in a lot of ways. Like even like the film itself is kind of playing up with that, like you said, with the film directly referencing like these liberal minded people who had their world shaken by what they didn't perceive to happen, which was that Donald Trump would win the election. This is a film where I think when people heard it announced, like similar to Rosewater, when that was announced, like that Jon Stewart was going to make a movie, it's like, oh, you think he's going to make a comedy? Well, it's like, no, that's going to be a pretty serious drama film. That I thought it was all right. I mean, I thought it was pretty good. Like it definitely didn't have the most confident filmmaking from Jon Stewart, but I think it worked because of the performances and because it had a very earnest approach. And I think that's more or less how I feel about this film as well, which is that when people are going into this, I think they're going to expect like some like visceral like attack on like all the like the right and like all these fairly right leaning people and like, you know, just kind of like sticking it up to Donald Trump and stuff like that. And the film is ultimately more a attack or a satirization, if it is a satire, on more left leaning people who see themselves as like well-meaning type, but they ultimately aren't really in the best interests of the American people or like the quote unquote heartland of America. And for me, I think that's more interesting and more potentially worthwhile as a commentary than something like that was just, you know, like a like satire of the White House, like, you know, like him doing his take on like what's going on in Donald Trump's administration. I think this is more like, I think this would actually reach the audience it's intended to get and might actually say something that reaches them. But it's also one of those things where we have to look at the execution, which is, I think, ultimately not quite as sturdy as it could have been. The biggest problem is that as a comedy, it's just not particularly funny. And the weird thing about it is that it's not even really trying to be that funny at times. Like the jokes are fairly mild mannered. Like there aren't really a lot of broad jokes. And when there are broad jokes, they kind of feel like out of nowhere. It's just kind of like, oh, okay, that's kind of an odd decision for this scene. So I think that's also something that's throwing people aback as well. But I don't know, there is something about its fairly modest approach that I think really took me in a good way, which is that like I never felt like the characters in the small town, this like Wisconsin area, were ever like stereotypical or like kind of like played too broadly. And if they were, there's kind of a point behind it that, without giving anything away, made it fairly interesting as far as like what the like optics are of it. I think one of the big reasons why I was a little bit more endeared to this film than others was Chris Cooper's performance, which, I mean, Chris Cooper's always great. I mean, we just saw him in A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood and Little Women do some really good stuff there, but he's always good. And I think his approach to his character is a lot more grounded and honed than what it might have been on the paper. So I think that brings a lot of life and a lot of honesty to this film and this performance. And I also really enjoyed Mackenzie Davis as his daughter as well, who's always good. Yeah, I mean, like you, I'm back and forth. Like every time there's something I want to praise, there's something I also want to criticize. So yeah. I'm not like fully enamored or fully critical of the film, but I definitely find myself more receptive to it than a lot of critics I've seen and read so far.
Yeah, I think this film definitely won me over in the end. We don't want to give anything away, but I think what it ends up doing by the end of the movie is it really subverts your expectations with its own formula. And I think you could argue that it's a little shoehorned. But I actually, you know, the more I think about this film, the more I'm like, no, it really is building up to its main message. And I do agree with you. The big flaw is that it's just not a very funny comedy, which is sad. I wish it was. I wish it was, tons of laughs, which you would expect from Jon Stewart. But yeah, for whatever reason, the jokes are pretty hit or miss, mostly miss. But I was never like bored watching this. I was never feeling like I'm wasting my time. It wasn't painful. And I think that it helps that it's not super long. It's only about 100 minutes. And there's good performances here, and I do think there are enough funny things here, and there are a lot of shots taken at more right-leaning people. So I didn't mention this, but like the town itself is like a right-wing town. That's how it's portrayed. And I think the funniest things about this movie are when it goes after the media, when it goes after specifically like people like political pundits. And so that's why the criticism doesn't make sense to me, that this thing, both sides, Democrats and Republicans, I think it's way harsher on right-leaning conservatives, and it's more sympathetic to Democrats while also like knocking them down a peg. But I think it's kind of like The Hunt, where I think people sort of look at that as a surface level, like they superficially say that it's equal to both political sides, when I don't think it really is. Like, I think it's actually in that movie going after a specific type of liberal a little bit more. And in this movie, I think it's the same thing, but it's a little bit harsher on like Republican people. But then at the very end, it's sort of saying like, honestly, it doesn't really matter. Like, all of this stuff is made up. Like, it's just a game. It's not really like the things that will like solve the country have nothing to do with what team you're on. It's all about sort of really like people kind of coming together and solving like real problems and sort of putting all the political stuff to the side, which that's the message that I think resonated with me a bit more. But I think some people are so entrenched in like the way they view like their partisan life right now, that's not the movie they want right now. So I wouldn't begrudge anybody who finds this movie less than enjoyable for that reason. But I do think this is going to appeal to way more people outside of like, honestly, and I'm not saying this in a mean way, but outside of liberal bubbles, I think people are going to get a lot out of this. So I think it's an easier film to recommend for that reason, but I still think it's pretty flawed like as a film, like you said, in the execution.
Yeah, I mean, it's a type of film that seems like it's going to have the expiration date of milk. Like, I don't think this is a type of film that's going to like last like the years. Like you said, it's even kind of dated now, and it just came out like 2 days ago. So it's not a film that's going to like, it's not a film for the times. Like, it's of the times, and it's probably going to maybe even be relevant for like a week, if that. But I mean, that's what politics are. It's like, there's a short lifespan for politics anyway. So I think Jon Stewart knows that anyway. I think he just took his shot. And like I said, I think people are just expecting this to be like a broad satire, and I don't even think it's really a comedy. I just took it more as like a lighthearted drama more than a direct comedy, which I think is what differentiates this from The Hunt for me, which is that film. Like I said, maybe it's not quite as both sidesism as I was making it out to seem before, but I do think that film, like, it's a little bit more cringy because it's trying to be like kind of more surface level, just like, hey, both these sides are kind of weird. To me, like, that doesn't really add much to the conversation. This is actually saying something without giving away that I think is relevant and something that I think a lot of left-leaning people should be hearing. But again, I mean, it's not just the message here. I don't want to get that listener in a tiff if that's right. Fine. Like, I think it's a fairly decent film. Like, I think, like I said, like, I think Steve Carell's fine. Like, I love Rose Byrne. I don't think her performance was the best here, but I think that's just because her character is so much broader and it's meant to be so much more satirical that she just doesn't really fit into the groove of the film. And in a way that I think might have been a detriment to the film. And again, I think that kind of adds to the tonal problems that people might be perceiving, is that I think it at times kind of goes for that more satirical thing that people are expecting of it, to the point where it does kind of confuse it a little bit. But overall, I mean, I think it's fine. Like I said, like, it's not what I'm going to be like reminiscing on for the years to come, but I think it's a little bit better than people are giving it credit for.
I think I agree, actually. And, I think, honestly, the more I think about this movie and the more I kind of look at it, I think that what rubs people the wrong way is that there is a sort of like obsession with Heartland voters because of what happened in 2016 from people who are part of communities that are dealing with the same things, plus, like, on top of that, even more issues. And it just feels like sometimes, like, people like Jon Stewart and like establishment sort of Democrats are like are really just sort of, how do we win over these Heartland voters? And in a way, I think actually that's a reason to kind of like this movie, because it sort of points out that Heartland voters are a lot smarter and a lot more, they shouldn't be like condescended to. Like that's the whole point. Yeah. And like the whole idea that you can just win them over by making a bunch of false promises to them, or ignoring them outright because you just think they're all terrible people is the wrong way to go about things, because they are human beings. And I think sometimes people just sort of dismiss that entire like section of the country because they think that they all are just terrible human beings, but they've never even met them. So that's the sort of thing that I think this film accomplishes. And I guess it ties into, because you wrote a written review of this, which is really good. You wrote about Irresistible and like why you liked it a bit better than a lot of other critics. And the thing that stuck out to me about that is that you do point out that Jon Stewart has a point he's trying to make, and he makes it. Like he doesn't, that's the thing that you can appreciate about this film, even aside from all of the stuff that doesn't work, is the message and the thing he's trying to say comes through pretty clearly. And you might not agree with it, or you might think it's the wrong message for right now, but he still makes that point pretty well, I think. And the last thing I'll say too, I mean, if you want a better version of this movie, if you do want a political sort of movie about this sort of like apolitical divide, and you want something that ages better, check out Primary Colors or rewatch it. That's a really good movie from the late 90s that really, I think that movie holds up pretty well. I don't know if you're a fan or if you've seen it, but I recommend it. That's from Mike Nichols. And I just think that it really captures, like when you rewatch that movie today, I suspect you'll be like, man, we really saw a lot of this stuff coming. And because that's also a film that's sort of about how it's all really such a game. Like the people, all the pundits and the journalists, Republican and Democrat, like they hang out. Like a lot of them are friends. A lot of them are putting on a performative show because that's just what gets people involved. And it's so annoying to me that like we fight all these battles on their behalf. And I'm sure I fall into that trap all the time but if you actually like look behind the surface, like a lot of these people are just sort of doing it to get a rise out of the public. And I think that that's just a shame, because this country has a lot of problems, and I think we're pretty far away from solving a lot of them. So that's our political review of or not Primary Colors, of Irresistible. I'm like a pretty high C+. I'm almost at a B-, but yeah, if this movie was just a little bit funnier, I'd have an easier time recommending. But I still enjoyed it. What did you think, Will?
I was a low B- on it overall, just because like so many movies we've talked about and so many movies we've seen, they just kind of come and go. Like they're out one year, or in one year out the other, and it's just like, okay, fine, whatever. Like whether I enjoy them much or not, it doesn't really leave an impact. This is one I've been reminiscing on, like at least because I saw this about like 2 weeks ago. So like for the past couple of weeks, I have been thinking about it. Like I said, I'm not always favorable on it. I do recognize the flaws. I do see a lot of the issues that people are bringing up. And like I said, it's not a film that I think is going to be remarked upon or revisited a lot. I think it's a film for now. And if you like it or you don't, it's going to be a part of this time. So, yeah, I can see why it's not quite as hard hitting as people are expecting it to be. I think by design, it's meant to be a lot smaller and modest than people are expecting it to be. So I think that's kind of informing some people's reviews as well. But I enjoyed it more than I didn't. And I do enjoy a lot of the performances in here. And I do like that it does have kind of a more sensitive touch than a lot of these comedies that kind of have the sledgehammer approach, which is like knocking everything down. And this is more trying to find the kind of subtle humanity in things and kind of having a broader point that I think is a little bit more interesting than your average comedy. So like I said, I mean, it's not one I give like a hearty recommendation to, but I think I'm a little bit more receptive to what Jon Stewart was doing here. And I would like to see him do some more films, because I did enjoy Rosewater, like I said. But in the end, I mean, I feel like the better satirical or political satires tend to be movies like The Death of Stalin, or something that is a little bit reserved from what's going on now. Like movies that are directly commenting on now and explicitly say so tend to feel more dated as a response to me. Whereas like movies like that tend to, I think, have a little bit more stability, and I think are a little bit easier to recognize what's going on, but have some distance from it at the same time. So, I mean, I would say check out The Death of Stalin. It's on Netflix now, but Irresistible is not bad. I mean, I don't know if I'd pay $20 for it. I think this is like a solid Netflix rental if it ever comes on Netflix or like whatever streaming service. I think that's the best way to see it.
Yeah, I was going to say, we don't rent on Netflix. Not anymore. I mean, you can, I guess.
I'm showing my age, I guess.
Just get on your Quickster account.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, it's like a Redbox film. It's like if you got it for $2, it's like, yeah, it's fine. It wasn't really like. I mean, it's kind of better that's not going to theaters, because I think if I did see this in theaters, maybe I would have been a little bit more upset that I like went out of my way to see it. Whereas like getting a screener of it and just checking out on my home, I'm like, oh, okay, it's agreeable. It's fine. Like, I think if you just tap and check it out sometime in the next couple months, I think you'll think it's fine. But yeah, by no means is it a redeeming or irresistible classic. It's just fine.
That's Irresistible. I could easily see myself bumping that up to a B-. I'm still kind of on the fence between C+ and B-. It's really close, but yeah, I agree with a lot of what you just said there. So maybe you want to check out Irresistible as well. It is now on video on demand for rental. All right, let's talk about our next film, My Spy.
I'm just not that good with people. But there is one thing I'm good at.
The mission was to find out what they knew, but that's kind of difficult now that you killed everyone. I just don't think you're cut out for intelligence. This is your last shot.
How's school going?
Oh my god, you have jelly all over your face. I'm definitely posting that on Insta. Is it too late to homeschool me? Are you CIA?
How'd you get in here?
Oh, okay, she has a camera. She might be streaming.
If Kim finds out we got made by a 9-year-old, my career's over.
What's the option?
Kill her. Make it look like an accident. Yeah, maybe the stairs.
What? Wow, still recording. We can cut a deal. I want you to teach me how to be a spy.
But just to be clear, this is a one-time arrangement. Never again.
Pinky promise. So what's first? Shooting range, obstacle course, or to walk away from an explosion?
A lie detector test. I can smell a lie. Endorphins release an odor, and the ultimate tell, the slightest blink of an eye.
You mean like this? JJ, I admire all of your tattoos.
Stop.
JJ, I believe you that you've never taken steroids.
Damn, she's good.
My Spy is a film that technically sort of almost came out in March because you saw a screener for it. And this was right before the COVID-19 pandemic started shutting down theaters. It was like right before this movie was going to have its theatrical release. So you saw this film months ago, almost 4 months ago. And it's just now come out on Amazon Studios. It is a new action comedy directed by Peter Segal. Peter Segal, of course, you know from like Nutty Professor 2, Tommy Boy, Anger Management, 50 First Dates, Longest Yard, Get Smart, a lot of comedies. He is a very prolific producer at this point. And his new film stars Dave Bautista, Chloe Coleman, Kristen Schaal, Ken Jeong. Very, the kind of cast I guess you would expect for like a comedy like this, kind of harkening back to films like Game Plan, where like The Rock is paired up with this pretentious kid. And in this case, we have Dave Bautista in that sort of like muscle guy role, who is a CIA spy who gets his cover blown by this young 9-year-old kid played by Chloe Coleman. And she uses her knowledge of him being in the CIA to basically convince him to do a bunch of stuff for her, including like training her how to become a spy. Hijinks ensue. A very basic film, very formulaic. You know this movie inside out before you've seen it. Everything in here has been done before. But I'm going to say, Will, because I have a feeling you don't like this film very much. I really enjoyed it. I watched this and I looked at it for what it was. And I was like, there's nothing in here that I can say this is the film cinema has been waiting for. There really is nothing remarkable in this film. But I think everything in this is basically average. And it was the kind of film that I wanted to kind of watch at the moment I watched it, where it's just a chill Sunday morning. I'm watching Dave Bautista, who is not much of a people person, hanging out with a precocious kid. There are decent laughs here. And you can just sort of, in my case, shrug off all of the cheesy stuff. This is just like that kind of family comedy, like Pacifier and all that is really approachable, really accessible. Nothing terrible about it, nothing great about it. And I guess to some people that might be the issue, is that it's just so safe. But I'm not going to lie, Will, I kind of liked this one. And I don't know. What did you think of My Spy? All these months later, you've had so much time to collect your thoughts. on My Spy. I'm ready to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a weird episode for me because we're talking about like one film I saw 2 weeks ago, a film I saw literally like 4 months ago, and then next we're going to talk about a movie I just saw yesterday. So it's like going like so far, and they're all like you said, like kind of fairly like old fashioned comedies. Like they all feel like something that would have came out in like the 2000s,
a little bit.
late 2000s. So it's like a very weird episode for that. But yeah, this movie, I mean, I didn't really go in with much expectations. Like it was an early screening when I saw it, so just like, okay, I don't know, whatever. Dave Bautista. It seems like all these action stars or former wrestlers, like there's something in their contract where it's like you can do all these kind of intense action movies, but at some point we're gonna call you and you have to do like some kid focused like family film. I don't know what it is. Like I don't know why this happens, but this one for me, like you said, it's fairly formulaic. It's fairly cliched in how it goes about it, but there's also something about it just feels like a lot more tonally off for me in that like this film, it's PG-13. And I thought that might have just been because like, yeah, like they made like a sex joke or something like, oh golly gee. But like, it's a fairly violent film for like a family oriented, which kind of took me back in the beginning. It was like, okay.
For sure. There's like legit, like tons of death.
Like at the beginning of the film, yeah, like at least like 3 people die from what I remember. And it's just like, okay.
More than that. It's like a whole like gang of, it's a ton of people dead. Like at least maybe a dozen.
Yeah, it's like, oh, okay, is this a kid's film? Like, did I get into the wrong Dave Bautista movie? Yeah, so it starts off like that, and it's like, I don't know, it's not a particularly bad action scene, but just feels off, and it just informs what I feel like is the rest of the movie, where it's just like, it's going back to those cliches, where it's like the jokes are like, you know, the broad fart joke, whatever things, and then you'll have like moments where it's like Dave Bautista's like threatening to murder a 9-year-old kid, and it's just like, okay, like, I'm not crazy about either lane, but pick one.
But that's what I see. That's the sort of thing that I responded to, is that it really does just go for broke on being tonally dissonant. And I don't know, for me, it kind of worked. I don't know. Maybe that says something more about me.
I don't know. I just felt like younger kids, I think, are going to be bored by like the actual spy stuff, and like adults aren't really going to be engaged by the kids stuff. So I just don't really know, like, is this more for kids or is this more like for the parents? Like, I don't really know who it's intended for.
For John.
Yeah. For John.
I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. I mean, I watched stuff like this when I was a kid, you know, like kind of like action movies I was too young for. And I think that's probably what they had in mind. You know, like kids will watch stuff that's pretty messed up. And even though this film goes a little far in some of those cases, I do think that, I don't know, I think there is stuff in here that the kids will be like, let's watch My Spy again. And parents be like, am I a bad parent?
It's not even that I'm like offended by it. I just find it weird. Like, I just don't like, I don't think the comedy is very good. Like, I just don't think it's a good film on its own. I just don't really get like, that would make it what would be a fairly generic film that like is whatever genre. Like, it just feels like, now there's like this added tonal clash where it's just like, not only is this like not really grooving for me and not my thing, but just like, I don't even know how to categorize this. Like, I wouldn't even really feel like younger kids would even dig it that much. And like you said, maybe they would, because like I grew up with a lot of films like this, like they're fairly like adult leaning, but are meant for kids at the same time.
I mean, preteens, like I think preteens would probably enjoy this, because preteens probably really like Dave Bautista from the Marvel movies.
But then why not make the central kid like 12 instead of 9?
I think just they wanted to cast Chloe Coleman in particular, and she is kind of like almost pre-tween. It's like kind of on the edge. I don't know. I think that you would still, I don't think a preteen would not watch this just because the kid is a little bit younger.
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, like, if that was the intent, why not make the kid older? Like, I just don't get that.
I think because the contrast is funny. Like, it's funny to see her at various instances like outsmart this guy. I think that would lose some of its shine if it was like not as, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think they just casted based on like the poster looking the way that it looks.
Yeah. That's the thing. Yeah. And that's just like, that's not really my thing. Like, at the end of the day, like, these are just kind of nitpicks because I just feel like the movie is just not my disco. Like, it's just, I don't really like kind of broad comedies like this where I can tell what jokes are going to come up. Like, it's just very slapstick heavy stuff that, like, I'm not against Peter Seagal's stuff. Like, I enjoy the Naked Gun movies a lot. I really enjoy 50 First Dates. I remember enjoying that when I was younger. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. it wasn't really my thing. Like at the end of the day, like I think it has flaws. Like I think it's not a good film, but it's also just not something that just screws with me. And I find the weird intensiveness of the action scenes to kind of be more off-putting than charming. But if that's what endears people, then so be it.
So be it. I wash my hands. No, I
did after
honestly,
the movie because that was when the things were getting pretty bad with the coronavirus.
There we go. Yeah, I just found this funnier, I guess. Like it is very generic, broad humor, but I think there are enough good jokes to keep it moving. And yeah, there's just another case where I was never like, I want to stop watching this. I don't want to watch. I'm so bored by this. I mean, because I know what's going to happen before it happens, because most people will. But I did think that they put in some clever jokes, and here and there. And I just think Dave Bautista, I think he has that sort of gift for making getting laughs over very little material. And I appreciated that in this movie. He wasn't just trying to do the same thing that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson has done, that Vin Diesel's done, that John Cena has done. He has his own sort of brand of like former pro wrestler being comedic, and his whole thing is that like he puts his foot in his mouth and he's just kind of like socially awkward. Where we've seen that before, but his version of it is a little bit more earnest, and I kind of bought it a little bit more. And obviously this is not a great movie. I mean, the emotional undercurrent is not particularly strong. But yeah, there were moments where I was definitely chuckling a bit, and I liked these characters enough so that I think this is an easy recommend to families of like parents and like teenagers or preteens. If you have like, older, younger kids who can deal with the violence, I'm sure a lot of them can. I think this is a pretty easy watch, especially because it's on Prime Video. So like, compared to some of the other stuff we've talked about, like you don't have to spend any money to rent it. It's pretty accessible.
Yeah, I do believe it's at some drive-ins, though. I think they gave it a decent theatrical drive-in rollout, though, to be clear. But yeah, I mean, the only thing I'll add to that is that I agree with you that Dave Bautista, I don't think this is like a cash grab for him. Like I think he is earnestly interested in doing this. Like I think he just wanted to make something that was like in his brand, but also kind of appealing to a younger audience. I mean, granted, he did Guardians of the Galaxy, so I guess that's also kind of something that's a little bit for the kids as well. But yeah, I mean, like I said, at the end of the day, this is just not my thing. I guess the opposite of you is like, if I wasn't watching this in the theater, I probably would have shut it off like halfway through. Like I just wasn't really engaging with it. And with everything going on at the time, like it just wasn't like something that was I was really to get my mind off of things and have a good time with. It was just like, okay, well, this just has the distinction of being the last movie I saw in a traditional theater. So other than that, it really didn't do much for me. So I'd give it a pretty low C.
Well, I gotta say, I think that there is an audience for this. It's funny because I was telling you in our we were chatting earlier in the week. But yeah, when this dropped, I remember like I was hanging out with my fiance's family, and we were playing a game, and I overheard like a bunch of stuff coming from the living room, and it turned out her dad was watching this movie. So clearly, Will Ashton, you are out of touch with.
I didn't say. I mean, to be clear, I never said it doesn't have an audience. I said this is not a Will Ashton movie. This is not my thing. But I'm sure other people are going to like it. Fine, whatever. Totally.
I think some people will like it. I think other people will definitely be like, why the heck are they arguing about My Spy? Just get to Eurovision already. Sure. But yeah, I'm a pretty high C+. I think this is pretty enjoyable. Very close to B- as well. Because I laughed more in this than Irresistible. It may not have as good a message, but it made me laugh, and I like Dave Bautista a lot. So I'm a pretty easy target for a movie like this. So that is My Spy, a C from Will, and a maybe B- from John. I'll keep that a mystery.
Okay.
For now. B+. All right, let's get into our last review.
We're on their toes for next episode.
We're gonna start getting emails and tweets.
Just tell us what he thought of the movie.
Don't keep us waiting. But all right, at the risk of keeping the listeners in suspense, let's get into probably the biggest movie to come out this weekend.
Yeah.
And, we actually talked about, is this really the featured review? This is the #1 movie on Netflix right now. That's right. We're talking about Eurovision Song Contest, the Story of Fire Saga.
Ever since we were children, we've had one dream.
Winning
the Eurovision Song Contest.
All right, everyone. I am Lars. This is Sigrid. We are Fire Saga.
Who wants to hear a Eurovision song?
All of Iceland thinks we are a joke.
That's not true.
And my father is ashamed of me.
No, he's not.
He looked me into the eyes and said, I am ashamed of you.
Maybe he was drunk.
He said, and you might think that I'm drunk, but I am dead sober.
Idiot.
Officially, Fire Saga will be representing Iceland at Eurovision this year.
I hate them.
Absolutely terrible. They're old, disgusting people. But we have no choice.
So we're in. Yep.
42 countries, hundreds of performers, and a worldwide audience of 180 million. This is Eurovision.
Like we mentioned in the teaser for last week, this is the latest film from David Dobkin, pretty well known for making films like Wedding Crashers and Shanghai Nights. A lot of films, of course, with Will Ferrell. This is his newest film, which is kind of like a musical comedy. It's a very broad comedy. It's kind of that same sort of Will Ferrell movie. Will Ferrell's in this, of course, where he is in an occupation doing sort of outlandish things. So Blades of Glory and Talladega Nights and Semi-Pro. It's like that kind of format. We've seen him do this how many times? And along with him, we have Rachel McAdams and their childhood friends who ever since they watched ABBA in the 1970s perform on Eurovision, they've always wanted to represent their country, Iceland, because they're both Icelandic in this movie, not American. Funny. In the Eurovision Song Contest. And Pierce Brosnan, who plays Will Ferrell's father, for some reason, even though they look about the same age, he is not about this. He is super against it. But they, through a matter of pretty ridiculous circumstances, find themselves competing for Eurovision. And they meet some pretty colorful characters, including Dan Stevens as one of the breakout roles of 2020, I would have to say. We'll have to get into that more. But a lot of other side roles in this. Demi Lovato has a really fun recurring gag here. And there's a lot of like unknown actors you probably don't recognize who are absolutely hysterical. And I first thing I'm going to ask you, Will, do you ever watch Eurovision?
The song contest?
Yeah, the real one.
Yeah,
I've never seen a single thing of Eurovision, so we're not super equipped to comment on that. But I know one thing. I have talked to a couple people who do love Eurovision. They watch it every year, and a few of them have said, "Yeah, it's sad because there was no Eurovision this year. It was supposed to come out in May, but it was canceled because of the pandemic." And they have really liked this movie. Like, this movie has sort of filled kind of like a vacuum that this contest left because it was canceled. And I actually found that kind of touching, because I think one thing this movie does really well is it does both celebrate as much as it satirizes the Eurovision deal. As far as I can tell, I don't know how outlandish Eurovision really is, but based on what I've been reading and noticing from other people, it's apparently pretty spot on with like kind of the culture of that song contest. Overall, I think this is a pretty funny movie. And even though I think the first like 30 minutes are pretty rough, it really picks up and the laughs actually start happening. Like, I did not find this very funny. I think Will Ferrell is the absolute weak link here. I can maybe count on my hand how many jokes really worked with him, but Rachel McAdams, Dan Stevens, Pierce Brosnan, they get the biggest laughs out of this. And overall, I like this one kind of fine. What did you think?
I thought it was okay. It was another film where I think the worst part about it is I didn't really laugh that much. Like, there are a couple chuckles. Well, I will say there's one scene in this movie that I think mostly because it caught me off guard, I thought was really funny. Like, it made me laugh for a good bit, but like, it was like kind of like, it was less common than anything else, where it's just like, I think everything else in the movie was just kind of like, yeah, that's fine, whatever. But I do think what separates this film from a lot of Will Ferrell's recent movies is that it is, like you said, fairly earnest and fairly wholesome in a way that his other movies have recently kind of been more kind of ironic and kind of more adult oriented. And this feels like a return to kind of the more, like you said, broader kind of more man childish things that like I think some people are tired of, and some people are going to see it as sort of nostalgic and like a return to his older style. I mean, I guess there was Holmes and Watson a few years ago, but everyone's basically forgotten that film or tried to at least. So, I mean, I do think like he's committed to this. Like obviously he wrote it. And I think this is the first film he wrote without Adam McKay, which is, I guess, something worth noting. But it is weird, like you said, that his performance feels like the odd man out in this, and that like it feels like he's like 10 years older than the character is supposed to be. And that adds like a weird kind of sadness to his role that I don't think was intended, which is like when we see him at the beginning of the film being like a middle-aged guy who's like still holding on to this childish dream. It's supposed to be kind of like, oh, look at this goof. But like now that he's like 50 something, it's like, okay, yeah. And this is pretty sad.
See, that's why I don't want to do that thing where I say I'm criticizing the movie that I want to see and not the movie it is. But I cannot help but pitch. This movie could have been one of the best comedies of the year. All you have to do is switch Will Ferrell and Dan Stevens. That's it.
I guess so,
put Dan Stevens as the main character. It's a different kind of movie, and obviously, like, it's not the same exact sort of structure. But Will Ferrell would have worked way better in this as a side character, I think. That's all I'll say.
The outlandish Russian type, as opposed to the
right.
Yeah, I can see that. I think he's been doing more supporting stuff recently for that reason. Like it seems like when he does do something like this, it's like Zoolander 2 or something like that, where he does kind of like he plays up that absurdist kind of guy pretty well. But I do think what makes it work better than some of his other recent films is, like you said, Rachel McAdams, who like I mean, all the actors are fighting their accents, I think, in this movie. So like Will Ferrell's kind of doing it more ironically, I guess, than the other characters, and like Pierce Brosnan is like verging on Swedish Chef territory at times. But yeah, Rachel McAdams, I think it's the thing that really stood out to me in a weird way is that like even though she's kind of putting on this like affected Icelandic accent, and you can kind of see through it, she still has these moments of like emotional sincerity and like wholehearted goodness, where it's just like she's clearly so invested in this character, and it feels like a return because she hasn't been acting in, I think, the past couple of years because she had a kid. And she hasn't really done a comedy since Game Night, which it wasn't that long ago, but it feels like a while ago with everything that's been going on. So, you know, it did feel nice to see her again, the comedy. And I do think it's another thing where it's like all of her drive and motivation seems to be driven by male characters, which is annoying from a writing standpoint. But I do think it's a credit to her performance that she does kind of bring out this emotional sincerity that I think adds to the movie's unexpected sweetness, which I think is what people are resonating with, is that it does have this kind of like wholesome, like good vibe kind of mentality that seems to be against the kind of more cynical, ironic stuff that's been going around recently. And I can respect that because, like, you know, like a show like Joe Parra Talks With You, I think is one of the reasons why I like it so much is it is kind of wholesome and intentionally unironic in that way. And I think that's something that really resonates with me. And I think that's what's speaking to people about this film. But at the same time, like I said, I just didn't really think it was that funny. So it's like, I can appreciate what it's doing. I think it's fine for what it is. I think it's better than most Netflix comedies that we've gotten of late. But at the end of the day, I still don't think it's anything particularly noteworthy as people are making out to be.
I think it's weird because I think the jokes, again, hit or miss, but the jokes that work in this movie had me laughing really, really like there are some really good laughs in here. You just sort of have to wait. And they just are, they're too occasional, that is the struggle. I do think like there's a recurring gag here with elves that has one of the best payoffs. Like that was the scene.
You didn't see that coming?
I did, but it was so brilliantly executed. I just thought it was flawless in that sense. But yeah, I think that like I was saying before, the jokes here, when they don't work, they don't work. But I think what carries this as a comedy is the musical side of it. I think the music in here is actually genuinely good.
I agree.
Like even when it's just trying to be like a parody, it's good parody. Like there's like a song along that happens in the middle of here that just sort of feels like we're celebrating like past Eurovision contest winners. And that's really what it is. Like they brought in like the Eurovision winners. And I did know that because I don't watch Eurovision, but you kind of can sense like, oh, these are like incredibly gifted singers. And it's maybe a good introduction in that sense to people who haven't seen it before. And it's just so joyful. And it's just so fun. And like, I never got the sense that this was taking shots at Eurovision in any sort of mean-spirited way. And I think that's why overall it works. And I got to tell you, Rachel McAdams, like, I think this movie has confirmed something that I've really been suspecting for a while. And I think that Rachel McAdams is probably one of our best actors. I think she's in top 10, maybe top 20 actors working right now. And just look at her filmography. I think even the bad movies she's in, even movies that are kind of average, like Southpaw, or I would say Doctor Strange, that's not a great film, but she just brings something to every film she's in. You mentioned Game Night, but also Disobedience, which was 2017. That was a movie that say again? Spotlight, of course. Like she has like these really great roles. And I think that versatility is what makes her one of our best actors, because she can be absolutely scene stealing in Mean Girls. Like her role is still iconic from that, which was a breakout role. And she can also be like a romantic lead who can go to toe to toe with anybody, as we saw in like Notebook and again, Wedding Crashers, which she was in. Yeah. I just think like even in films that are kind of like schmaltzy, like Time Traveler's Wife, or kind of like formulaic, like Morning Glory. And even when she's not a likable character in Midnight in Paris, like she's always dynamic. She's always playing something different. And then some of her best movies, like I'd say About Time, are when you're just like, man, this is one of our best actors. So I just have to say, Rachel McAdams, she deserves to be celebrated more and more. And I'm glad this movie exists because it shows that versatility, that she could do something as silly and weird as this and still be convincing and still be believable. And yeah, I think it's not a movie that when people make top 10 lists one day for Rachel McAdams, they're not going to be like, well, there was Eurovision, But when it comes to like best Rachel McAdams roles, I could see this being there.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what I was trying to say before, is I have nothing mean to say about Rachel McAdams. I think she's great. And I think she is a big reason why this movie goes down smoother than it would have otherwise. And I think, like I said, her commitment to the bit, because it's a fairly one joke premise. Like I don't think the movie tries to ignore that, but I do think her commitment is what kind of brings some freshness to it. And I think it's what people are responding to, besides Dan Stevens, who I wasn't crazy about Dan Stevens' performance, but I didn't dislike it. Like I thought it was fine. I don't know.
Okay, that's okay.
I just don't think there's enough there to make it like anything particularly noteworthy. Like I think he did a nice job. Like I just don't think.
Ashton.
Hang on a second. I'm faulting the character more than the performance. Like I think his performance is fine. I just don't think there's a lot to the character that's really that special. I do appreciate though that they didn't like make his character gross or like weird in any way. Like there's a weird wholesomeness to his like sexually prone guy that like, even though like he is like that kind of character that would be kind of like off-putting in other films, like there is like a weird charisma to that performance that is really I think a credit to him. But
do you at least see what is so transcendent about the Lion of Love song number?
I get that Dan Stevens is very attractive, yes. That I'm not blind.
I'm just saying, if again, I'm putting things in context of lists, but if I had to list out right now my favorite movie moments of the year, Lion of Love is easily in the top 10, like no question.
It's a real I need a hero Shrek 2 moment, I guess.
I just don't know, Will Ashton. I don't know what's going to break through that ice cold exterior you've been putting on the last few weeks. I don't know.
I mean, how much have I praised Rachel McAdams so far? I think she's great. I don't know. I mean, it's fine. Like I said, like I definitely think it's better than most other Will Ferrell comedies we've gotten the past 10 years that aren't like the Lego Movie, for instance. But I don't think it's like anything particularly like return to form for him or like anything that's like especially noteworthy in the comedy scene. I think it's better than your typical Netflix comedy, but like I think, you know, it's still a fairly average film by and large. That's also way too long.
Yeah, I do think we agree there, even though I do like Daddy's Home quite a bit better than you do.
Which I still don't get, but fine.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. We don't have to talk about it.
Sure.
And I still haven't seen Holmes and Watson. I don't know how that turned out. I also I don't think I saw Daddy's Home too, or I didn't. I might have started. I don't even remember what happened with that movie.
Daddy's Home 2 is one of the worst comedies ever, I think. Maybe.
I think what pushed me away from that was the whole Mel Gibson thing, honestly. So
he wasn't even the worst thing about it. The only thing I remember liking about it was John Lithgow, who is a treasure, and I think we need to see him in more movies again. Make John Lithgow and Rachel McAdams, put them in the movie together. He could be her dad or something. I don't know.
All right. Yeah, I think this is a really fun movie, and I really enjoy it. So I'm gonna I give this one a B-. I think that it's not for everybody, and I think its biggest weakness is probably the runtime. This is not a movie that needed to be 2 hours and 3 minutes long. That does include the credits, but this is like an hour 35, hour 40 tops. And part of that is the pacing of it, is that it just sort of like rises and dips a little bit too much. And there's some extra things in there. You could have easily just edited out. But aside from that, I think this is a pretty easy recommend, especially for a Netflix movie or Netflix comedy right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost there for me. Like, I give it a very high C+, because I do like that it's sweet. I do like the supporting performances. I do like, I mean, it's very hard to make Iceland look bad. So, I mean, the movie, at the very least, is a nice looking film for the most part. And yeah, like you said, I mean, I do think it does have some winning moments. There is a running gag with Demi Lovato's character that at the end that won me over. So yeah, that was really good. I think that's a credit to what you're saying before, and I do agree that I think it is a musical comedy that respects the music aspect of it, which seems like a given, but it's not for a lot of these films. And sure. And I think that's a credit to its film as well. I just don't really think it's that funny or that noteworthy. It's like a Blades of Glory kind of thing where it's like, it's fine. Like, you know, it's nice it's a Netflix film because you don't have to go out your way to see it. But it didn't like win me over to the point where I felt like I can really recommend it. Maybe if it was like 105 minutes long, it did cut out some of the fat, like you said, I might be more receptive to it. But as it stands, a very high C+.
Yeah, I think I do want to harp on that. Like the whole, you can tell like a really great songwriter was involved in this. Somebody who really is good at making pop music. The composer for this was the music was by Atle Orvasan, who is very well known, very great composer. And so I think that's the stuff in here that really helps. Like I think to contextualize this, it is kind of like a pop song movie, in the sense that it's not very deep. It's pop. It's, you know, there's stuff in here that's really catchy and very flashy and things that a lot of people will like and will stick in your brain. But yeah, you can't dig into it for a lot of really deep layers, and nor should you really try to. So I think for some people,
sorry. No, I was gonna say, do you think this movie might work better if instead of Will Ferrell it was Adam Sandberg or Andy Samberg?
Maybe.
Because they're the same age.
I stick to Dan Stevens, man.
I mean, I'm just thinking because like if Lonely Island was involved with this, and like Andy Samberg and Rachel McAdams are like the same age, so I think that might work. I think his energy might work better for this than Will Ferrell, but that's just something else.
We'll see Andy Samberg soon in Palm Springs, which is, I think, the best comedy of the year so far, and I cannot wait for you to see it.
Yeah, I'm very excited.
That is an interesting idea, though. I think that I could see. I did think a lot of Popstar, Never Stop, Never Stopping while I was watching this, and I know some people have said like, maybe this should have been like a mockumentary kind of thing. Maybe that would have been a better format. But I don't think I agree with that necessarily. I kind of like how this turned out overall.
But sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
That's about it. I think that I think like most pop songs and most like, you know, it might stick in your head or it might annoy you, but I think for most people they'll get something fun out of this. So I give it a B-. And that's it for our reviews of the week. We have a lot of other stuff coming out next week that maybe some things that are going to be pushed again. I'm actually kind of confused about this because there's one movie on this list that might actually be delayed. We'll get to that. First, Hamilton, the live recording of the Broadway musical, is going to be hitting Disney Plus next week on July 3rd. I don't know if we're going to have a lot to say about Hamilton, Will. I mean, that's a musical that's been out for like 5 years.
Yeah, I never saw it, though, all the way through. So
I've seen a version of it in San Francisco. And it's something that's been talked about to death. I don't know if it really will warrant a full discussion on the show. But there is a new Netflix movie coming out called Desperados, which I hope we get to talk about. That's the new Ellen Rappaport movie, her screenplay. It's directed by LP. And it's got
not
like
LP, the musician, I'm guessing, right? LP, a different LP.
I think a different LP. Yeah,
I was gonna say. I'm joking. I'm pretty sure it's not LP from Run the Jewels.
I am interested in this film because Nasim Pedrad is in it. I really love her. She's such a great actress.
She's good, yeah.
Yeah, Robbie Amell, Lamorne Morris, Heather Graham, and this looks like kind of it just looks like kind of like a decent comedy coming out of Netflix. I haven't heard anything yet, but I don't know if that'll be our main review, honestly. But
I don't think so. It looks like a fairly small movie. Like even by Netflix standards, it looks like a pretty like TV movie-ish kind of thing.
A little bit, but I haven't found anything else unless I'm missing something that would.
Well, I mean, Hamilton makes sense, I think, for the main review, even if we don't like have like loads of. I mean, it's going to be the big release, undoubtedly. Yes. So they spent how many millions of dollars to buy that thing?
I know we'll talk about it to some extent. It's just like, are we going to review Hamilton? Like, I don't know. It just
we can talk about. I think there's a broader discussion to be had in there about like, you know, like how many musicals have really been put on streaming? Not that many, and I think that's something that's an avenue that could be explored.
Netflix has a bunch of. I mean, like Newsies, and like we didn't talk about that. I mean, I don't know. I like get it because
the stage productions of them or the movies.
The stage production of Newsies, yeah, that's how a lot of people discovered that play. And yeah, I mean, I know that there's plenty to talk about. It's just in a review format. It's like I don't see a reason to review Hamilton, right? Like I
guess, yeah. I don't know. I mean, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Yeah. There is another movie. I really hope this comes out, but I'm seeing conflicting release dates. This is what I was referring to earlier. There's a new movie called Relic from IFC Films. It premiered at Sundance. Great reviews. Everyone I know who's seen this has really liked it. It's like an Australian horror film. And it was supposed to come out July 3rd, but I'm seeing some reports that it might be July 10th. And I'm not sure why. I'm not sure if it's because it's hitting drive-ins on one day and hitting VOD on another day, and that's the confusion. So I hope it's July 3rd because I'd love to talk about that movie and be able to see it. And it'd be fun to talk about a horror film because I feel like we haven't seen a decent horror film in a little bit. But that's all I've found so far. There might be a couple of other VOD things that are under the radar that we might be discussing next week as well. But if we miss anything, be sure to let us know in the comments. Or if you do think we need to review Hamilton, we will listen to your feedback on that.
I think we should talk about Hamilton no matter what. But I'm looking at some things. I guess there's a John Lewis documentary that's coming out. You heard anything about this? It's called John Lewis Good Trouble.
Oh yeah. That's the like when he was like the civil rights era, and it's like about his whole life and everything.
I guess so. I mean, there's that. There's something called The Truth, I guess, is coming out with Ethan Hawke and Juliette Binoche.
Okay.
Something called The Outpost, Scott Eastwood and Orlando Bloom. I don't know if these are actually coming out.
Yeah.
But I guess those are films that might be coming out next week, and who knows?
Yeah. I don't know. There's some. That's the thing. I don't know if these are going to warrant as much discussion, but Outpost is interesting because it does have a really good cast because of Orlando Bloom and all that.
That classic Scott Eastwood.
Well, it's based on a book by Jake Tapper, isn't it?
I have no idea. I've never heard of it until now.
Oh, okay, I heard a little bit about this. There was some like buzz for it, even though Scott Eastwood is not exactly like on the ascent like he used to be, I guess. But
was he ever on the ascent?
I don't know. But yeah, Good Trouble is an interesting one. I forgot about that because I think it was supposed to like be at a few festivals, and I don't think it did, as far as I know. I think it's like another Tribeca faithful that's just getting released. But yeah, there might be a few extras then for us to talk about. Might be interesting.
Well, no matter what, we'll figure something out.
Yeah. All right, that'll do it though for us this week on Cinemaholics. Thanks as always for listening, and I guess we'll see you all next week. From the Internet California, I am John Negroni.
And from the Internet Pennsylvania, I'm Lash.
See you next time.